All right, I think we are missing a microphone. I prefer the lapel one, so I have hands to do stuff with. But I'll see what I can do here to get started. I don't know if are we online tonight, Jonathan, or no? Okay. Oh, okay. Just the slides are up. Okay, so if you are watching us online, you don't have to look at me tonight. You can just see what we have on the screen and hopefully hear us. So sorry about the delay for technical problems. All right, if you take a look up here, we are going through this Life of Christ series. It's a series that meets twice a week, so we have it Sunday morning for our Sunday morning Sunday school class, and again, we just alternate through this Life of Christ series. So we are already 8 lessons into this. It just seems like we just started. But I also look out the window. It's daylight. When we started, it was not. So where we've been so far, we've looked at sort of the events before the birth of Christ, some of the ideas about the prophecy that the Messiah was coming. We looked at some of the political landscape of the time, and the past couple lessons have been on the birth of Christ and the birth of John the Baptist. So tonight, this is kind of a tough one. We're going to be in a section called the silent years, so there's not a lot to talk about since the Bible is silent. 50-50 if it works. All right, let me turn this one off first. That's probably a good idea. All right, yeah, I'll have to go one-handed tonight. So, these silent years are the period after Jesus' birth. We get one look at his childhood when he's about 12 years old, and then that's really all we see until about 20 years later. So let's go ahead and get into it tonight. Our text we're going to start in is up here on the screen. Oh, I've hit this a lot of times. But before we get into that, our text is going to be Matthew chapter 2 and Luke chapter 2. Some of the things we're going to look at here is the time of Herod the Great. So everything I'm going to talk about right now, because it is the silent years, is based off of historical writings, archaeology, and things like that. So at the time, Herod was in charge of this area of the world, but he was a king who had to defer to Rome. So he was sort of a vassal of Rome, even though he was a king. He was called the Great because he did do a lot of really big things. He rebuilt the temple at the time. He rebuilt many cities. One of the cities was a port city that they actually filled the harbor in so that they could have trade there. And, this is before any kind of mechanization, so it's a lot of work. A lot of the cities of the time that he worked on had Hellenistic buildings. And what do I mean by that? I mean they had hippodromes and theaters and things that would be recognized to the Greeks. So he did a lot of very, very big civic projects. He was also a really good diplomat because he kind of had to keep Rome happy, and he really had to keep the peace in Jerusalem. So as long as he was kind of between two worlds as far as keeping the Roman oversight happy and keeping the population of his kingdom under political control so that they wouldn't rise up against the Romans. So he found himself in sort of a position where he had to keep a lot of people happy. Speaking of keeping a lot of people happy, I keep going backwards. This is a new remote for me. He had to keep 10 wives happy from what the historical record shows. So maybe that's where those diplomatic skills came in. Because he had so many wives, he was very paranoid, and he was always afraid that somebody was plotting to kill him so that they could take over the throne. So he had sons with all these different wives. So I guess you would call those princes that were sort of really vying for the throne, and there was a lot of treachery and poisoning, and these kinds of things were happening all the time in his life, so he was very paranoid. And he was also constantly plotting to kill his rivals. He tried to get all the Jewish leaders in one place and poison them all. It didn't work. I didn't read why it didn't work. There were even some of his sons and wives that he had put to death because they were plotting against him. So all these rivalries kind of made him very, very paranoid. And if you know the story, you can probably see where I'm headed with this. So let's go ahead and read the text before we get into that up there. Matthew chapter 2, 13 through 18 is where I'll start. Let's see. Matthew 2, 13. So this is after Jesus' birth. If you look above, we're not in what is it called? We're not in the manger right now. The wise men have come, and Herod was pretty. Well, let's just go back and look. I said 13, but let's go back to 7. So with all this historical context I just gave you, Herod being paranoid, someone's always trying to take over. He was really worried about that sort of thing. This is 7, reading from 7. Then Herod privately summoned the wise men and determined from them when the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and look carefully for the child. When you find him, inform me so I can go and worship him as well." Well, we know this is not true. This kind of feeds into his paranoia. He was threatened by possibly a new king coming, so he wanted to take care of that. So let's skip down back to 13. So after they had gone, and I believe they're talking, the they there is the wise men, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt and stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to look for the child to kill him." Then he got up, took the child and his mother during the night and went to Egypt. So he walked out in the middle of the night here. He stayed there until Herod died. In this way, what was spoken by the Lord through the prophet was fulfilled. "I called my son out of Egypt." When Herod saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, he became enraged. He sent men to kill all the children in Bethlehem and throughout the surrounding region, from the age of 2 and under, according to the time he had learned from the wise men. From what was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled. And so this next part is a quote directly out of Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Raham, weeping and loud wailing, Rachel weeping for her children. She did not want to be comforted because they were gone. All right, so let's take a look up here. This is a kind of a tough topic. Some people call these babies that were murdered the first martyrs. So what we see here, before we get into this, I just want to stop for a minute. Last week in my class, we talked a lot about Joseph. And again, many times when God gives messages to his people, they kind of hesitate or say, "Are you sure I'm the right person?" Or man, I don't know if this is the best idea. We see that a lot of times. But every time we see Joseph receive these dreams, he just does it right on the spot. No hesitation. He just instantly does it. And I paused in the middle of the text to kind of talk about that. He literally leaves in the middle of the night, I think. And I don't know if that's because they were trying to be secretive or because he got the dream right in the middle of the night. Maybe it's a little bit of both. But this is 100 miles to the Egyptian border and then another 100 or more to Alexandria. So we don't know how long they stayed in Egypt, but we do see that Joseph just does what God tells him to do with no hesitation, no questioning. And we talked a little bit about it, but we see it again here. And I think it's a lot about was last Wednesday night was how Joseph and Mary had to be incredible people to be the earthly mother and father of Jesus. So any thoughts on that before we get into the innocents here? Okay. Yeah, we're going to talk briefly about that. So you're right, Dave. We don't have a really good biblical sort of timeline that tells us exactly how long they stayed there. Look at Matthew 2:16, everybody. This might... So Herod kills all the boys who are 2 and under, according to the time he had learned from the wise men. So I know Herod's pretty, just from the historical side, does some pretty treacherous stuff. But if you're going to keep your population under control, probably going around and killing their children is not the best way to do that. So we get a little bit of the timeline here because Herod chose children 2 and under. Now, as I studied this, when a Jewish sort of birthday, or counting how old babies were or even adults, you were born and you were 1, okay? In our custom, you're born and you have your first birthday. But when in the Jewish tradition, once you were born for a year, you were 2. So 1 would be kind of like, I am on my first year. And 2 is kind of like, well, my first year is done. I am starting my second year. So what we see there as far as timeline is maybe, this is just a guess, Herod's giving himself a range because he didn't know exactly when Jesus was born. And it also kind of shows that the wise men weren't there right at the birth event with the shepherds, which we always see the nativity manger and they've got the wise men and the shepherds all together, but we don't believe that's the biblical picture if we examine it closely. Any comments? We talked a little bit about that last week. Yeah, that's one of the other weeks I looked at all the journeys of Mary and Joseph from Nazareth to Bethlehem to Egypt, then back for, we'll look at this one, that one, back for when Jesus was 12. So what we see here, that Herod probably thought, well, the baby's probably about 6 months to a year old, so I'm going to give myself a safety range. Now, a lot of art and a lot of writing depict this event. Some people call these babies the holy innocents. There are things in certain other groups have things in their calendar to commemorate this or to sort of recognize this. And often people think that it's like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of babies. But Bethlehem was a really, really small town, and looking at population demographics, and accountants have gone and looked at documents. Remember, there was just a census, so they estimate there were between 12 and 50 boy babies. So remember, there's only, if you think about like this church of 200 or so people, how many boy babies do we have under the age of 2? It's not that many. So a lot of times people think it's many, 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 many babies. And the reason it comes up is because there's a lot written about Herod, but historically we don't see this event, okay? Now, silence in the historical event is not proof that this didn't happen, but that's why it comes up when historians look at it. They're kind of like, well, with infant mortality, this is probably a dozen babies, so people probably just didn't even care or write about it. Remember, we're in Matthew right now. Luke does not mention it. So any thoughts on that as we move into this? This is a really tough question I have up here. How come God, I think this is a question people may ask, how come God did not protect these babies? It's a really tough question, I think, for some people. Like, why didn't, this is a terrible, terrible thing. Imagine having your baby ripped out of your house and killed by a Roman soldier, I would imagine, or a member of Herod's guards or whatever. But I think we have to pause here and look at many, many times God has used people who aren't his people to do things. Whether it's Pharaoh in Egypt is an example that comes to mind. And God gives all of us free will, free moral choice. Like right now, Satan has free moral choice, and God has his sovereign will. With that free will comes God always being just and righteous and long-suffering in everything he does. But God has judgments, and his judgments are always in the best interest of man. So we really have to look at this in a matter of wills, okay? We have Herod's will. We have Satan's will. We have God's sovereign will. And just stop for a moment and consider the price God paid for us all to have free will. So man has free will to choose to follow God or to not choose to follow God. Any thoughts on this? Okay. Let's jump to 19 through 23 in Matthew. So reading from Matthew chapter 2, 19 and 23. I'm trying to be very explicit about chapter and verse for people who are online. After Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel. For those who are seeking the child's life are dead." So he got up and took the child and his mother and returned to the land of Israel. But when he heard that, oh, help me with this one here, Archelaus was reigning over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. After being warned in a dream, he went to the regions of Galilee. He came to a town called Nazareth and lived there. Then what had been spoken by the prophets was fulfilled, that Jesus would be called a Nazarene. Let's look at Luke's account, This is just one verse. You're going to be Luke 2:39. Right. So when Joseph and Mary had performed, this is Luke 2:39, when Joseph and Mary had performed everything according to the law of the Lord, they returned to Galilee, to their own town of Nazareth. And the child grew and became strong, filled with wisdom, and the favor of God was upon him. So after Herod's death, Herod's son is now reigning, and Joseph decided to go back to his hometown, and this is where Joseph and Mary had started at. All right, let's talk a little bit about this town. If you were a Nazarene at the time, the Jewish people did not hold that particular group of people in very high regard. So it was really considered a backwards, low-class area. It was the site of a Roman garrison. And so we see Jesus, if I said, hey, he's the Nazarene, that could kind of be actually seen as something negative. I think there's something interesting in this, though. Jesus has a very, as far as we know, normal childhood here. And again, I think this talks a lot about Jesus' humble origins. So we look at Jesus as a Messiah, and at the time, people probably thought, well, Messiah would never be from that area because it's such a backward, low-life kind of area. But Jesus, again, he had very humble beginnings, from being born in a manger, from being from this backwards town. I think I'm from a backward area, and I didn't even know it until I left it. Anyone else like that? So just humble origins is what we see here. Any thoughts on this before we move on? The normal childhood we read in Luke 39, it just says he grew and became strong. So this is the silent period. It's also the silent class tonight. So if anybody wants to get brave for me. I know there's really not a lot to say because the Bible is just very, very matter of fact here. And it just doesn't say too much. I don't have this in my notes, so I'm going off my notes for a second. What if the Bible did have every little detail of Jesus' childhood in it? Why do you think God chose not to tell us that? Right. I like both those answers. It wasn't necessary, be a lot of detail. Imagine if you were a parent, or think back to when you were a child, if we had a full account of Jesus' childhood, and your parents were kind of like, when we read about Jesus' childhood, he didn't have this problem. I mean, I just think there'd be so much there for parents to be held to. And we don't hear a lot about Jesus' childhood. We also don't hear a lot about his young adulthood as well. We don't get to him until he's in his 30s. So it's probably part of God's plan that we don't have all this, I'm just going to, detail. It's unnecessary. It's unneeded. So we get one small glimpse of young Jesus here. So Jesus is in Nazareth, and then he goes to visit Jerusalem. So this visit tells us, let's go all the way back to Deuteronomy 16. 3 times a year, Deuteronomy 16, all your males must appear before the Lord your God in the place he chooses for the festival of unleavened bread, the festival of weeks, and the festival of temporary shelters, and they must not appear before him empty-handed. Every one of you must give as you are able, according to the blessings of the Lord your God that he has given you. So we talked sort of about how righteous Mary and Joseph were. It would be very unusual for them to not follow these Jewish traditions, these different festivals. So we get a picture here we get this one picture of young Jesus in Luke. So let's flip back to the New Testament in Luke 2:46. Okay. Let's read this, 46 and 47. Well, let's actually start a little earlier here. Now let's start in 41. Jesus in the temple. Now Jesus, I'm sorry, there's an apostrophe S there. And it's on the outside because Jesus ends in S. So Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem every year for the festival of the Passover. When he was 12 years old, they went up according to custom. But when the feast was over, as they were returning home, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. His parents did not know it, but because that, they assumed he was in their group of travelers. They went a day's journey. Now, I'll tell you this. One time, a bunch of my family came out to visit, and I told you I'm from Nazareth. I'm from backwoods in the middle of nowhere, coal mine country, eastern Ohio. So when my family comes out here, they all want to go out to eat at the big restaurants. So one time, it was my family, a couple of my siblings, all these kids, and we all went out to eat. Well, Maddie was pretty young, and the same thing happened. She was taking a nap, and we just left her at home. Because we thought, kids don't get to see their cousins, and they want to ride in another car, and everything. Well, I thought we arrive, and we do the head count. We need a table for 17 or whatever it was. And I need to interrupt. All right. Yeah, I remember Angie retrieved the missing child. I think it was Polaris, but so I just want, you don't have to tell the story. Has anyone else ever left a child behind? I see some arrows and hands. It's pointing. Everyone else is starting to tuck their hands into their armpits. Spouses are looking at spouses. So, go. You left one at church? Yeah. Did they lock up? Did they lock them in? So, if you've ever, maybe you've left your child behind, or you've been at a big, amusement park or fair or this or that, and you lose your child. Okay, we've all done that. Now Jesus is 12. I can't imagine. So you're the earthly parents of Jesus. I would think, if he was a kid that got lost, he would be able to maintain his cool, but you can still see that the parents are kind of a little bit excited about this. Let's take a look. Okay, yeah, I like that. He wasn't lost. I guess the parents were lost from him. All right. So Jesus stayed behind. His parents did not know it, but because they assumed he was in their group of travelers. It's in parentheses. I love that. They went on a day's journey. We only went, out to Polaris and started getting a table. Then they began to look for him among their relatives. That's exactly what we did. I thought she was with you. No, I thought it was with you. No, Maddie was sleeping, like the littlest cousin says. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, it'd take me forever. So remember, yeah, it's very, very important. Like this was only a, 20-minute drive. They are a day ahead. Okay. So they went back to look for him. So they go back. After 3 days, I think we were about 3 minutes after we got out of the car, they found him in the temple courts. So this wasn't just, oh, we lost track of you, there you are. It's, we traveled a day, then we went back and looked for 3 days. And yeah, this is quite several days here. A day out, a day back, 3 days in looking. We're at 5 days so far. They found him in the temple courts, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard Jesus were astonished at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were overwhelmed. His mother said to him, "Child, why have you treated us like this? Look, your father and I have been looking for you anxiously." I'm trying to put a little acting voice into this. But he replied, "Why are you looking for me? Didn't you know that I must be in my father's house?" Yet his parents did not understand the remark he made to them. Then they went down with them and came to Nazareth. Then he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was obedient to them. But his mother kept all these things in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and with the people. Okay. There's a lot here, okay? We see what was likely to be a normal interaction between teachers and students, but I think it's really important that we emphasize the amazement. So, teachers and students interacting in this sort of place would have been a common thing. And he is only 12 years old, okay? And he is a perfect 12-year-old. It's kind of hard to put all those words in the same sentence. A perfect 12-year-old. I don't know. I keep, as I prepare for this, especially this, and was obedient to them. How do you imagine parenting, again, someone who's perfect is? Like, hey, I'm gonna tell you to do this thing, and Jesus probably did it, maybe already knowing how to do it or that it needed to be done a different way. I just keep thinking about what would it be like to have a child who was perfectly obedient to you, except because we're told we're to obey our parents, and you don't have that sort of perfection. To have someone under you who's obedient to you, yet perfect, how do you parent that? I don't have an answer. Go ahead, Charlie. That's a good point, too. You were saying there's no such thing. Tell me, what were you meaning with that? I'm sorry. Go ahead. Nan, I thought somebody said there's no such thing. I didn't. Oh, okay. I thought you were saying there's no such thing as. I got you. I was listening to two things at once. Yeah, I just don't know what it would be like to have someone, whether it's a child or an adult or whatever, if it was an employee or I don't know, in any way, when someone underneath of you is perfect. That's really hard. I'm a school teacher, and I've had a couple gifted students, and even though they're gifted, they don't have experience to kind of deal with their gifts, and they're very smart, but they miss some things. And even teaching these kids who are probably at times smarter than you, but smarter and experienced aren't the same thing. They're able to figure things out faster than I am, but they still are missing something. So that is the closest I can get to it, is having someone more talented under me, but it's not even close to this. So I don't know. Go ahead. Right. Right. Yeah, I think you're right too. And I think when we say perfect, if you had him stand at the foul line and shoot 100 shots, would he have made every one? Is that the kind of perfect that matters? Is that the kind of perfect that matters? That's a nod to my wife. I'm just saying. All right. Yeah, I thought about that too, Jim. I was kind of like, I wonder if he ever had to sweep up sawdust, and it was like the most perfect clean floor. I don't think that's necessarily like, maybe. Do you think he ever hit his finger with a hammer accidentally? I think so that kind of human experience, falling in. If you're perfect, you never fall and skin your knee. I don't think that's the kind of perfect that matters. I think the kind of perfect that matters is the moral, the heart. But I still think just parenting this has got to be. Joseph and Mary had to be very special people. Whoever brought up the siblings, I cannot. Like, Jesus does it every time. Why can't you? I just can't. Why aren't you more like your brother? All right. So let's get back to this scene in the temple here. So he's sitting there with these men at the synagogue, and Mary's very frustrated. And some people have in verse 51 obedient subjection to his parents. It's just, I don't know. This glimpse into his childhood just brings up so many questions. This is just one little picture we have. I love someone mentioning his siblings. I don't know why. I've got a lot of siblings, and it just kind of makes me chuckle. Any thoughts on this as parents? I know there's a lot of parents in here. Any thoughts in general, looking at how amazed the teachers were? It kind of shows here an awareness when, didn't you know that I must be in my Father's house? What does that question mean? What's that question mean? That's not a, did you know this weird unknown thing? That's a, didn't you know this is where I would be? That's after they were looking for 3 days. Didn't you know? What does that mean? That they what? Joseph and Mary what? Known what? Yeah, they. Right. Where I'm trying to go with the question, and I think you are with me there, didn't you know means, and we know this from the dreams and from the star, and that they knew he was the Messiah. Like, didn't you know? It's not like he grew up this secret, superhero that got bit by a radioactive spider and then became Jesus. He was Jesus the whole time. Because that didn't you know question is a nod to, well, you know I'm the Messiah. It doesn't come across like that, but I think it's there. Go ahead, Dave. Sure, yeah. Jamil or something like that. Gamil, yeah, Gamil, yeah. I'm right there with you. Hey, just pronounce it with confidence and everyone will go, oh, that's how you pronounce it. Okay. Yeah. Oh, I see. Yeah, I see what you're doing there. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, he just fell in with some friends and he's, I don't know, skipping rocks or, yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah. It points out to the, yeah, I really like your train of thought here. You, it, it highlights the normalness of his childhood. He wasn't walking around spouting, lost proverbs we don't hear about. Yeah, go ahead, Dave. And I see your hand back there. Go ahead. Right, right. That's still done today. They'll get up and yes, that's when young Jewish men get up and do the cantor and they're recognized in the synagogue. Go ahead, yeah. Right. Yeah, big transition. So I want to close with 52. Um, you have to read it slowly because there are four types of growth here. So we have he grew mentally. That's where it says in wisdom. He grew physically. That's where it says in stature. He grew socially. That's where it says in favor with men. And he grew spiritually in favor with God. So we end this sort of picture of Jesus' childhood with this really beautiful picture that he's growing into the same person that's going to tell us the Sermon on the Mount, the same person who's going to, it talks here about Mary being worried about him. She was there when he was on the cross. So I just can't imagine. So I think I've given up on these slides here quite a bit. I think this is where I want to start wrapping it up. We pass very quickly over the first 30 years of Jesus' life, and it's really, the scripture is not an autobiography of Jesus. So let's just stop and think, though. Even though the scripture is not this full autobiography, we have what we need and we don't get into unneeded detail. It is going to be wonderful to get to heaven and ask, Jesus and others about the things we don't know. Like, what do you think Jesus' first word was? That's a big deal in the lives of parents and children. Again, what were Jesus? You're just sitting there talking to him, which would be amazing. What was it like to have this earthly brother? And we will ask those questions. Could you make 100 foul shots in a row? Okay. So I don't know. Those are the kind of questions. We talk about things in the Bible, not just exclusive to this time, but those questions come up quite a bit. Any final thoughts? This is the silent period, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up the silent period. This was hard to prepare for and hard to cover just because there's not a lot there. Did I miss anything, or did anybody have anything that they would? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. About the innocent children, go ahead. Yeah. And there's countless unnamed people like that in the history of Christianity who had to die for what they believed in. Great point. Any other final thoughts? Yeah, this series is the life of Christ, so we're trying to dig down into that as deeply as we can. Having taught a couple classes before, I'm really enjoying the depth we are able to go into in this series. I don't remember who I was talking to, but one time I did a Proverbs 13 weeks. Like, you just can't. But here, we're really stretching this out, and we're examining Scripture with much more depth. I think both types of teaching are great. To take a survey and hit the highlights, but to really slow down instead of going a mile wide. We're not going a mile wide. We're going deep into this. So let's go ahead and close. Josh, will you close us with a prayer? Josh Fairchild.